לא אמור לראות את המסך, למה אנחנו יכולים את המסך?
תכף כשזה ייגמר. זה
אפשרו את האנשים.
את צריך להדליק את האור באולם?
כן, תדליק אותה. Hi.
Oh my Lord. They cried.
We're just waiting for the screen to turn on, so everyone can see you. I can see Monica and Avila are together. So until you see them, I can just begin with a few words of introduction. Good evening. I'm really excited. Oh, there you are. Can you hear us?
This is not yet. So she's not the person. Somebody said it in a few weeks for introduction. Different person.
No, I'm muted. Can you hear us? זה אמור לפוד כאן.
Oh my
Can you hear us?
Yes, we hear you.
So many things I want to say as an introduction, but I will want to mostly leave time for the conversation. Seeing this movie I made for the 5th time, each time brings me to tears and gives me so much hope, and I would say jealousy, but a very productive one, and we'll talk about it also here. Before we begin, I would like really to thank everyone for coming here tonight to be with us. My name is Avila Kilmurray. I'm co-director of Food and Wage Peace. Some of our activists are here in the audience today. And I'm truly honored to host this conversation as a part of the People's Peace Summit, which is happening today and tomorrow in Jerusalem. And I will invite you also to join the summit tomorrow when we end this conversation. Can you hear us, Monica? Maybe we need to turn the volume louder.
אצלהם.
That's better. There's it.
הם לא שומעים אותך.
לא, אני שומעות מהמחשב. בוא נעשה, תשים מיוט. ולא, זה לא טוב. Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I do think it's our computer.
Try to speak for a second.
That's much better. We can hear that your voice very clearly.
המחשב לא מחובר לסאונד של האולם ולא שומעים אותנו.
הם עכשיו שומעות.
Hear us and we'll try to hear you better.
Yeah. Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so let's continue. Before we begin the conversation, I think that we need to acknowledge what's happening now, these moments, this time, these weeks and months, and almost more than a year and a half of suffering, of war. It's very weird to be here watching a movie, talking, and when really horrible things are happening. And the people stop.
We can't hear you.
The People's Peace Summit is one of the many efforts that are being made these days in Israel, in Palestine, to end the war, to stop the war.
ניסית מכאן קודם?
So we really need to acknowledge what's happening and to know that many people, thousands of people on the ground every day in this region work daily for this horrible war to end, for the hostages to be released, and for peace negotiations and long-lasting agreement to be achieved. Because we know this is the only way that this region can survive and Israel can survive. So we really need to acknowledge it, and also the role of women in negotiations and peace building, as we saw in the movie, is so crucial. We know that when you saw it at the end of the film, that when women are involved in peace negotiations, the negotiations are better. They are more successful, more quick, and they lead to better results, to better agreements. 35% more likely to the agreement when women are involved is 35% more likely to last at least 15 years and more. So we need women around the table. We need civil society around the table. We all know it. And today we want to talk to two women who actually did it. Before we begin, we just want to thank our partners in the Embassy of Ireland for hosting this supposed to host the Avila Week, for your efforts to come here, and eventually you weren't able, but you made the effort to be with us today through Zoom. We really appreciate it, and we take really so much inspiration and hope from your struggle, from your success, and thank you for being with us tonight. I will just briefly introduce both amazing women we're having here tonight. Professor Monica McWilliams was a delegate to the peace negotiations in Northern Ireland and a signatory to the Good Friday Agreement. She represented the Women's Coalition in the first Legislative Assembly after the agreement, and later served as Chief Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission, where she provided guidance on the Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland. She now serves as a member of the Independent Reporting Commission, working toward the disbandment of paramilitary groups. Dr. Avila Kilmurray has been active in peace building since 1975. She's currently program executive at the Social Change Initiative and was a co-founder of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition and a member of the negotiation team. Tonight, in the audience that you see, we have dozens of peace activists, women and men working every day on the ground to build bridges and promote dialogue between divided communities and promote peace. So what we'd really like to ask is simply this: please tell us what to do. but I'll try to keep my questions more focused, and I hope we'll have some time for questions from the audience, although we began a little bit late. Everything okay?
מה הבעיה היא אצלכם, לא נגמר, אבל מה שאת יכולה לעשות זה כן לשים את הרמקול עד זה וזה הכי בקושי.
אוקיי, טוב, בסדר. Okay, so let's begin. As we always say, we do our best in the worst situation. Monica, last year you participated in a conversation with the Geneva Initiative, and you said something that stuck with me since then. You said it happened suddenly, and we were prepared. So the question is for both of you, as women, as grassroots activists, we are begins just before the negotiations start, but so much has happened before, in the years leading up to this point. What can you tell us about your day-to-day work that laid the foundation? What did it take to be truly prepared? And what can we learn from your experience?
Well, we did not know when the moment would come. I keep repeating that I was 14 when the start of the conflict. I was 44 the day that I got up from the peace table, having signed the Good Friday Agreement. So for 30 years, violence had become normal. And we were pretty ordinary women who fell into extraordinary times. Like many of the women in the audience, we were accidental activists. We were taking on roles because of the war and the conflict that was going on around us that we had never expected to be thrust on us. Avila and I had both worked in the women's movement. So we had a pre-existing network of women working on violence against women. We had rape crisis centers that we were opening. We were working on the issue of very deprived communities and trying to keep children safe and from being shot. Many women were working on the peace lines. So there were women everywhere at the front lines, as there are in every war. And then there was a moment came in the 90s when, as a result of many tragedies, there was a decision by the two governments, the Irish government, the British government, that there should be peace talks. First, there was a ceasefire. It was a very tentative ceasefire and people were still nervous. But that left a moment for people to come to Northern Ireland to talk about their situation like we're doing now. And I remember sitting in a hotel in Belfast listening to two South Africans. One who is now the president of South Africa, but he was just known as Cyril Ramaphosa. And the other was Ralph Mayer, and they were from opposite sides. And we were in despair. And we thought, we'll never have leaders like you have. And they said, go home and grow them. And the second thing, I thought, that's really important message. We keep on thinking that we're the worst, we're intractable, we're not like South Africa, which was the other situation that had gone through a transition. So it was important to have that international message. We also had people from Czechoslovakia who had seen the rise up of civil society against the communist regime. And Václav Havel's people came, and then some Latin Americans. And I remember sitting at the back of the hall that night thinking, we should get organized. If there's going to be peace talks, we in the civil society who have been at the front line need to be at that table. And then there was a declaration that there would be peace talks, and we started organizing. And that's where the coalition came. Through the networks that were already on the ground, we put advertisements as simple as that in the newspapers. This was the day before mobiles. And we gathered people all around the country in public meetings and simply asked them, do you think the time has come for organizations from civil society, and particularly women, to form a coalition? And it was a coalition of people who thought differently in terms of their diversity. Some were for the unification of Ireland and some were for remaining with the United Kingdom. And we said, let's not put those big constitutional issues on the table right now, but let's find some common ground. And the common ground we found were three principles: human rights, equality, and inclusion, which you have just seen in the documentary how difficult it was. And then people were just sick of the amount of violence and said enough is enough. Yes, we may have blood on our hands. We may be jeopardizing all the good work that we've been doing in civil society by becoming political and forming this social movement. But it was a risk worth taking. And that's how the Women's Coalition came to win its place at the table. Can I hear you?
Yeah. We just had some difficulties here, but now we can hear you well.
Okay, well, and I could probably add to that. I mean, the other thing was we were divided by big walls called peace walls, ironically. So one of the important things, even before the ceasefires and before the Women's Coalition, was a community-based activity to actually bring women together from either side of those peace walls. We still have 100 peace walls in Belfast, so we're still working on it. But women came together to look at the everyday issues, the issues of poverty, the issues of violence against women, because one of the things that we found over the years of the violence was that the oxygen was pulled out of all those issues that were everyday problems for people. And women came together from the divided communities to talk about those sort of issues, recognizing that the constitutional issue was still going to divide us. And similarly within the trade union movement. So people were starting to actually say, yes, you know, the politicians we have actually are not representing us. They're focused on the conflict. We actually want to talk about other things as well. So that was really important. And the other thing that was really important was that civil society also made its voice heard when there was abuses of human rights. Organizations were there who monitored the army on the ground and were what the paramilitaries were doing, and were prepared to speak out about it, not to just go along because it was your side or our side. And that was very important in terms of providing a value base, which, as Monica said then, allowed us to bring women together on values of human rights, equality, and inclusion.
And don't think for 1 minute that that word inclusion was easy. We were called women who are in love with murderers. We were told that we were messing the pitch, that we were outsiders who didn't deserve to be inside. We were called naive. We were called dreamers. But all of that changed when they saw how organized we were, how prepared we were. Prepare, because you do not know when the moment comes. And the information that we were gathering was so much more important than the people who were refusing to speak to each other, who were strangers, who didn't know what the others were thinking. And whereas we did, and we created back channels. We went into places like prisons. We were invited to go and speak to the prisoners because the prisoners were really important. We made sure that they did not think that their negotiators were collaborators or traitors, or that they were engaged in some form of treachery by trying to work through what a peace process would look like. So the first weeks, perhaps even that first year, was not a very pleasant place for us to be, as you can see on the documentary. I tend to try and forget all that now, because I often said that getting to peace was more important than what was happening to us personally. But the personal became very political. And not only was the political becoming very personal, and we had families, we had children, we had the issue of security and safety. But more importantly, we had our eye on what we wanted. And what we wanted was to get into negotiations, to maintain the ceasefires, and hopefully one day, which we didn't know, we would reach an agreement.
It reminds me of a conversation I had a while ago with one of the drafters of Resolution 1325, and she was also present at some of the parts of the negotiations in Northern Ireland, and she said that while the men were talking about what happened 600 years ago, the women kept looking forward, what should happen, what should be done, what the communities need, what civil society needs to be more powerful and so forth. And this is why it was more successful. You talked about the diversity, about bringing in women and men from diverse communities, and you succeeded in creating this unified, inclusive voice, despite unequal power dynamics and conflicting perspectives, both within the communities and between the communities. I can say that we Women Who Wage Peace are trying to do the same thing, again, within Israel and with our Palestinian sister movement, Women of the Sun. We drafted together the Mother's Call, and we wanted to ask you, how did you navigate those tensions and shape the message that people on both sides, on all sides, could stand?
Well, a number of ways. I mean, first of all, right through the Troubles, but certainly, you know, when we were setting up the Women's Coalition, we recognized the need to give space for single identity discussions as well. Because if you just bring people from very antagonistic communities together, the danger is that that antagonism will sort of dominate. So it was important also to give people the space so that they could articulate, you know, their issues and how they saw things. And then we're able to share them with others. And again, we use the sort of the three principles, because if we found that we were bringing a controversial issue, and there was many controversial issues to the table to be discussed, the danger was that people then would split into their various respective identities or backgrounds. But if we were bringing a situation, as we had indeed, where a mother came to us and said her daughter was 8 months pregnant, she was being held in a jail in England on the allegation that she was involved in planting a bomb, and that she was being strip searched repeatedly. So that could have divided our people, because some would have said, oh, she's a Republican, so she must be guilty. Others would have said, no, you know, we have to visit and look at the situation. So what we would do is we'd say, well, our principle is human rights. Let's talk about human rights and then look at the issue. And in that case, what we did actually was, the girl was Catholic Republican. We sent one of our members who was a Protestant woman doctor over to see her. And when she came out and said, this is an abuse of human rights, then actually people could hear it. If somebody had gone over who was from a Republican background, people would have said, oh, well, she would have said that anyway. You know, so it was actually trying to use the fact that we had people from different backgrounds who could speak for the other, rather than just speaking for their own tribe, their own community. And that was really important. And then the other thing in terms of maintaining links with the communities that was really important was we were also working at a local level. So we were working with victims of violence. We were working with people that had been bereaved. And we were able to bring their issues. And incidentally, because I was director of the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, which was a funder at the time, I was working with 5 paramilitary ex-prisoner groups from different backgrounds around the table. So we knew the issues that we could then bring into the peace talks. And that was also very important, to ensure people's voices were heard, a whole diversity of voices.
And I think one of the things that civil society can do, and particularly in our case, was amongst the women, was we could talk to people that no one else would talk to. And so we set up lines of communication, and we always brought one from each side in the coalition so that we could be trusted, that it wasn't just one narrative that we were bringing back to the whole group. It was hard work. We took our discussions around the country to village halls. Every Saturday we went to a different part of the country. We explained what we were doing. So it was important to keep the grassroots with us, because they could very quickly see us as becoming elitist, that we were now the big players. And we wanted to make sure that we had the support of the community. And so we explained what was going on, made it more transparent. We did a lot of interviews, and slowly, the media took an interest in what we were saying and what we were doing, and began to hear our message. And then the other players began to see that we had influence and that people were listening to us, both internationally and locally. And they changed their tune. Even the insults that we were getting started to go down. But it was very important that we did that work around the country, that we kept ourselves relevant. And every week that we were at the table, we went out around making sure the message was very clear to the community, keeping the optimism up. Because people, when they're in the middle of a war or in a conflict every single day, it's just about staying alive. But we wanted to maybe light that little bit of a candle instead of cursing the darkness. And people liked that because they had heard enough about why it could never be possible for us to make a peace process work.
Before I ask something about the political process, I want to remain for another question on the ground, on the grassroots level. This event, this panel is a part of the People's Peace Summit, which is organized by It's Time. It's Time is a coalition of over 60 Israeli peace organizations that came together after October 7th to end the war and to begin negotiations. On your side, in your case, beyond the Women's Coalition that you founded, did you work in broader alliances? What made those partnerships meaningful or effective? What can we learn? We know that this is also a matter of diversity. We know that this is also a matter of bringing in many voices to the table. It's not easy. So how did you make it happen?
That's yours.
Well, we linked in with not just the women's organizations. We also linked in with trade unions, with a range of INGOs, with other voluntary organizations, which was very important in terms of just sharing the message of what was going on within the peace talks. Because sometimes peace talks, as Monica said, can become quite alienating because they can become very inward looking. So that was important. But again, you know, one of the things that we thought was that we worked for was, I suppose in the terminology, having broad fronts, that you didn't expect everybody to agree on every principle. If they could agree on a small number of core demands, core principles, then that was enough. So for argument's sake, at one point, we had what was called the G7, which was like the farmers' organization, the employers' organization, the trade union organization, the coordinating body of voluntary organizations, women's groups, youth groups, who came together. Now, they would have disagreed on a lot of issues, but they actually did agree on that they wanted peace and they wanted the prospect of a different type of society than the one that we had for the previous 30 years. And that was really important because they all had then their own constituencies of people behind them. So it actually broadened both the information base, but also the outcry in terms of continuing to move things forward.
And, it wasn't peace at any price. There had been 20 years before us a group called the Peace Women who won the Nobel Peace Prize. But they disappeared because it was argued that some argued that they just wanted peace at any price. Others thought that, well, the same thing was said about us, that you'll settle for anything, just so as long as you keep talking. We wanted to show we were different. And so we did argue that peace had to come with justice. Peace had to come with accountability. Now, you won't get accountability in the first year of the peace talks or even the second year. And I'd like to say to you that 27 years after we've signed the peace agreement, both Avila and I are still dealing with the issues of accountability in trying to get some truth and justice for many groups who didn't feel that the agreement had been very fair to them. So you won't have a perfect peace, but you do have to be pragmatic. And so we broke it down and we said, this is what we can do at this stage. This is what we can do at the next stage. And we did work with the victims groups because we could have been accused of simply working with the perpetrators. And we were working with both because everybody who was party to the problem needed to be a party to the solution. And of course, when the parties and the combatants came to the table, they didn't see themselves as having anything to be accused of. They thought they were all perfectly justified in what they were doing. And so we had to at times have very difficult conversations with them, and also go back to the victims' organizations and say, you know, part of this agreement, there's going to be prisoner releases. And this is going to be very hard for you. In fact, I myself sat at the table next to one of the parties that had killed my good friend. He was killed 51 years ago this month. There's not a day that I don't remember what he would be like today. That's what happens when you get into these situations. You end up being face to face with people who have done some terrible things. But as the process continued, we began to see leaders who began to say, we did this at this time, but we wouldn't do it now. We have changed, and we've changed because we are now understanding what the other side also needs. And so the conversation and the narrative and the paradigm began to shift slowly, but there were times when it was also very urgent that we moved the situation. So my message also would be, if you've got some progress, a little progress, keep the momentum going. Keep the optimism up, because there's enough spoilers and pessimists inside your society who will try to bring it down.
But the other thing in terms of that change was that, you know, it's not just change in attitude. It is also changing in some of the structural issues that actually fed into the violence. So for argument's sake, you know, the equality legislation that and the equality dimension and human rights that we got into the agreement was vitally important, because, you know, in virtually all conflicts, it's rare that you get an equality of power. And in our case, we didn't have an equality of power, and there had been discrimination. And when people are discriminated against and people feel humiliated over many years, then it is very difficult for them to actually see a sort of more hopeful future that peace can bring. So we had to get in new legislation around equality. We also had to get in major changes. Our whole policing service was changed. It had been 99% of just one community. We had a complete review of policing with international people overseeing it. And now it is much more, it is about 70%, but at least with affirmative action. So yes, there's change of attitudes, but also that has to be underpinned by the reforms that are necessary for people to see a shared future.
So what we're saying is there wasn't a part of that agreement that we didn't negotiate. We negotiated every single line of it. But there's also a section in that agreement that would not have been there had we not been there. Because some of the parties at the table said we were the victim makers. So we can't be the people who write what needs to happen to the victims that we made. And amongst us, there were many who had suffered terrible tragedies. And they were determined that we would get some words into the agreement. We should have got more, but there would have been none had the Women's Coalition not been at the table to say what we were going to do in the future to address the needs of victims, and reconciliation, and integrated education, and shared housing, because we lived in a totally segregated society and we wanted a different future. So we just didn't want the big issues that are always on the table about weapons and about armies and about power and who shares, who's going into the government and what the government will look like. We also wanted to say that the issues of education, the issues of our young people and what we're going to do with our young people in the future, how civil society can be involved, the two new commissions on equality and human rights, and I was later given the mandate to draft the Bill of Rights. Those were all issues that we negotiated. And that section, we're very proud of that section. At the time, people probably wouldn't have seen it as important. The section that's titled Reconciliation and the Needs of Victims. And today it has turned out to be one of the most important and one of the most difficult of the entire pieces of the agreement to implement.
Just a quick remark. I promise I won't ask you what to do, but well, you're saying and telling what you've done. I mean, some things we're already doing, and we need to continue, and some we need to learn and adopt. So I'm very glad this conversation is recorded, so we can take notes later and continue. I want to talk a little bit about this combination between grassroots activism and the political negotiations, two very different levels. And we saw in the film how difficult it was for you, the women, to be included as a whole. You didn't, I mean, as you said, you didn't only change the conversation there, you changed history. And the agreement would have been very different if you weren't there. But how did you balance staying true to your communities and grassroots level while stepping into formal spaces of power? And what helped you maintain credibility on both sides? And was you being women, did it help or was an obstacle?
Well, it wasn't easy, to be honest. First of all, as Monica mentioned earlier, we did recognize the importance of communication and just constantly going out and saying, these are the questions that are coming up. What's your views on this? And both to geographic, to local areas, women's groups, but also then to issue-based groups like the victims groups, like the ex-prisoner groups, you know. So that was really important. But we did actually also get the response of, oh well, you know, if we are seen to be aligned with you as a political coalition, then you know the other parties will take away our money, they won't fund us, they will see us being aligned as well, and that was difficult, and we weren't able to bring everybody along with us. But the ability to, because like you, we're a small society, the ability to just constantly tell people what was happening and ask their opinions, I think was really important. And actually, we deliberately called ourselves a coalition rather than a political party, because we wanted to underline the fact that, you know, that we weren't like another party. We were about giving voice to people in local areas, and particularly those areas that had been impacted mostly by the violence.
And I suppose when you start something like what we did, you get laughed at, or worse, you're told, just go home, stop annoying us, or don't you understand that the issues we're dealing with are too serious for you women to be involved in these issues? They didn't realize just how much knowledge we had, how much information we had, and where we didn't have it, we went out and found it. And that was a really important thing at the negotiations. They pretended often that they had all the answers. And we said, the certainty is not all on your side. And truth is not all on your side. And so we started asking questions when others thought it was naive to ask. And then we discovered they didn't understand it either. Remember, a lot of these people have never been involved in negotiations with their protagonists or opponents. They've only ever been talking to their own side. And I think that's the difference we made. We eventually became serious players, and we were acknowledged. And indeed, the chairperson of the Peace Talks, Senator Mitchell from the United States, and the Canadian chair, and the Finnish from Finland, the former prime minister, all acknowledged that perhaps the agreement would not have been as comprehensive and it wouldn't have been as effective had the Women's Coalition not been present. But no one told us that at the time. In fact, it was the 25th anniversary last year, 2 years ago now, that we finally were acknowledged as having been serious, credible players. At the time, no one thanks you. No one claps you on the back. No one says, we think you're doing a good job. So it was strange for us to wait 2.5 decades for that narrative to change, and for the big players, as I said, some of the big beasts, to actually now say, yes, we were glad they were present.
Inspiring when you're being grassroots activists and voicing and knowing the voices of all communities made you better negotiators than those who just came with a very one-sided view of their community or their party. This is really amazing. We're coming very closely to the end of our conversation. Of course, we could have talked more, and we will talk more. It's only the beginning, I think. So can you share with us, before we conclude, a moment that brought you close to giving up, and also a moment of deep hope when you felt that change was truly possible, truly happening?
There was more than one moment. There were many. At one stage, the situation got so violent that I began to get a bit nervous because of the people who we were talking to. But I wasn't in despair. I have to say that I never thought that it would end in disappointment. I actually did believe in us, but I also believed in the process. And that was the message. I said it would be a shame on us if we passed this problem to the next generation. I was an academic. I was a university teacher. I could have gone on easily writing all kinds of scholarly articles about the importance of women in peace building. But it was really important to be active in trying to make that change. So it was more the impatience. I am not a very patient person, but I had to learn perseverance and persistence and patience. So it wasn't despair. It was more of those qualities that I had to learn. But there was also moments of hope when people least could have believed that we were turning a corner. And we were very fortunate to be at many of those historical moments. I said on the day that we signed the agreement to the people, when we were asked to come out and address the people in front of all the world media, we have interrupted the culture of failure in this country, and there is no going back. And I'm very happy to say 27 years later that we have not gone back.
Yes, and for me, I think in terms of, I don't know if it was despair, but certainly despondency, was I have 3 children. The last one, a boy, was born just the day after a major atrocity. And the hospital was literally within a stone's throw of where it happened. And all you could hear was the army tanks outside and the helicopters and whatever else. And I remember having a discussion with myself just after he was born, everyone had gone. In 17 years' time, would I rather he be a perpetrator or a victim? And because we're not living in a binary situation, you know, people are both, in many cases with families, both are victims and perpetrators. You know, all too often politicians are inclined to say, they're the bad ones, we're the good ones. It's not like that in protracted conflict. And it was quite likely that he could have been either. Though actually, as it turned out, he was born in 1993. He was the only one of my 3 children who celebrated virtually all his birthdays in a peaceful Northern Ireland. And in terms of hope, I think it really, for me, was the day we got the referendum results of people in Northern Ireland and actually people in the Republic of Ireland who voted in favour of the agreement. And that actually showed that irrespective of the, you know, of the divisiveness of many of our political parties, that actually the people said, we accept this agreement.
Just before a few words of conclusion, I noticed when watching the movie tonight that you registered the coalition, the Women's Coalition, as a party on May 9th, right? 9th of May, 1996. Tomorrow is the 9th of May, and we're having the Peace Summit, and I think that it's not a coincidence. Maybe it's a sign So thank you for this. And thank you, Monica and Avila, for your honesty, for your courage, for your wisdom and generosity, and sharing your experience with us tonight.
And thank you, Yale, for reminding us of the day that we registered the party, because it almost didn't happen.
That's right.
So in my book, which is called, I'll give you a little plug for the book, Stand Up, Speak Out. In the book, I tell a very funny story, and there were many stories about how it was accidental and pure luck that we actually managed to get the party in over the door. And on that 9th of May, it was the very last moment. We were the very last party, and it was 5 o'clock, and we had to run up the stairs and literally throw ourselves into the room so that the electoral register could show that the Women's Coalition was now a real party. So thank you.
So this is a very good example of women's persistence. We don't give up. We go all through all the way, and we know that peace is never easy. It's not linear. It's not guaranteed, and it is certainly doesn't come without resistance, or as we call it here, co-resistance. But your story reminds us that it is possible, even in the most divided places and the most harsh circumstances. So we live tonight with a renewed strength, and with the reminder that what we do, our meetings, our organizing, our protests, our events, our persistence matters. It builds the ground for the moment when change becomes possible. So before we end, I want to thank the Cinematheque for hosting us tonight. And I really want to invite everyone here to join us tomorrow at the main day of the People's Peace Summit at Binyanei Ha'uma, where thousands of peace activists from across the country will gather for a powerful day of conversation, connection, and commitment to a different future. We hope to see you all there. And thank you again for being a part of this evening and a part of our call for peace. Let's continue walking this path together. Good night.
And good night. And thank you, Yale, and thank you to the Irish Embassy, and thank you to the audience for listening to us. We wish that we could have been there, but as you know, it was impossible for us to catch a flight. And the title of it is called It's Time. So I'll finish with those important words. It's time for you to hopefully one day see what we have managed to do here in Northern Ireland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, once again, switch off the spotlight. Our speakers can see the audience standing up. Thank you so much.
إذا ما